The bread crust in Everett Jamison's calloused hand represented the difference between survival and starvation. Yet when he saw the orc girl collapsed against the rotting fence post at the edge of his barley field, her green skin pulled tight over jutting ribs, he broke that crust in half without thinking and gave her the larger piece. She stared at him with yellow eyes gone dull with hunger. Blood crusted around her small tusks where her cracked lips had split, and for a long moment she did not move. Everett knelt slowly in the mud, his worn boots sinking into the soft earth left behind by 3 days of rain, and he held the bread out to her with steady fingers. The smaller piece he kept pressed against his palm, refusing to let his own gnawing belly dictate his actions. "Go on," he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse. "Living alone on the frontier did that to a man. You need it more than I do." The orc girl's hand trembled as she reached for the bread, her fingers thin and dirt-stained, nails broken down to the quick. She snatched it from him like a wild animal might, bringing it to her mouth with desperate speed, and Everett saw tears track down through the grime on her face as she chewed. He looked away to give her dignity and ate his own piece slowly, making it last, trying to remember when he had last seen another soul this far out on the borderlands. 2 weeks, maybe 3. A trader passing through with salt and nails, heading back toward civilization with furs and wild honey. The man had warned Everett about orc raiding parties spotted near the northern woods, told him to keep his hunting bow close, and his doors barred at night. But this girl hunched against his fence post looked about as dangerous as a starving rabbit. When Everett glanced back, she had finished the bread and was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Suspicion, certainly. Confusion, perhaps, but also something that might have been gratitude, buried deep beneath layers of distrust and pain. "What is your name?" Everett asked, brushing crumbs from his threadbare shirt. She hesitated, her jaw working as though testing words she had not spoken in some time. "Vasha," she finally whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "Vasha Zorath." "Everett Jamison," he replied, gesturing to himself. Then, because it seemed the only decent thing to do, he added, "When did you last have a proper meal?" Vasha's yellow eyes widened slightly, and her hand moved unconsciously to her hollow stomach. 6 days, she said. "Maybe 7, I lost count." Everett stood, his knees protesting the movement after a morning spent repairing the damage the storms had done to his property. He was 32 years old and felt 50 most days, his body carrying the accumulated aches of 10 years farming this unforgiving land after his discharge from the border militia. But he was not so old or so bitter that he could walk away from someone dying of hunger on his land. "Come inside," he said, turning toward the small cottage that sat at the center of his modest farm. "I have soup from yesterday. Not much, but it is hot and it will fill your belly better than bread crust." He did not look back to see if she followed. Either she would or she would not, and looking over his shoulder might seem like he doubted her or feared her. Everett knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of suspicion. The war had taught him that, and the years after had reinforced the lesson with brutal clarity. Behind him, he heard the soft scrape of movement and then the squelch of footsteps in mud. Vasha was following at a distance, keeping space between them, ready to bolt if this proved to be a trap. Smart girl. The frontier bred caution into everyone who survived it. Everett's cottage was small but well built, the stone walls thick enough to keep out the worst of the winter cold and the summer heat. He had built it himself, one stone at a time, after purchasing this plot of land with his discharge pay. The roof was good thatch, renewed each autumn, and the door hung straight on its iron hinges. Inside, the single room was sparse but clean, with a sleeping pallet in one corner, A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a stone hearth where coals still glowed from the morning fire, and shelves holding his meager possessions. He went to the hearth and stirred the coals, adding kindling and a split log, then hung the pot of soup back over the growing flames. The soup was thin, mostly turnips and wild onions with a few precious grains of barley, but it was food and it would help. Vasha stood in the doorway, poised between inside and outside, her eyes darting around the cottage as though cataloging everything, measuring distances, noting the location of the door and the single window. Everett recognized the behavior. He had done the same thing himself when entering unfamiliar places during the war years. "Sit if you want," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "The soup needs to warm through." She did not sit, but she did step fully inside, letting the door swing partially closed behind her. That was progress. Everett filled a wooden cup with water from the bucket near the hearth and set it on the table within her reach. She grabbed it immediately and drank it down in desperate gulps, water spilling down her chin. "Slow," Everett cautioned gently. "You will make yourself sick." Vasha lowered the cup, her chest heaving, and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I am sorry," she said, her voice still hoarse. "I have not had clean water in days. The streams are all flooded, the water brown with mud. Nothing to apologize for." Everett refilled the cup and set it back down, then turned his attention to the soup, giving her space to breathe and calm her racing heart. "Where is your clan?" The silence that followed his question was heavy and painful. When Everett glanced over his shoulder, he saw that Vasha had finally sat, her body folding into the chair as though her legs could no longer hold her upright. Her hands were clenched on the table, her knuckles pale beneath the green of her skin. "Gone," she said at last. "Dead or scattered." "The humans came in the night with torches and weapons. They burned our camp, killed the warriors who fought back. My mother pushed me into the river and told me to run." Her voice broke on the last word, and she turned her face away. Everett felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest. He had seen such raids during his militia years, had participated in a few before he understood what he was really doing, before he realized that not every orc clan was a band of violent raiders. Some were just families trying to survive, pushed further and further into the marginal lands by human expansion, forced to choose between starvation and conflict. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. Vasha laughed bitterly, a sound with no humor in it. "Why, you are human. You probably think they deserved it." "No," Everett said firmly, meeting her eyes. "I do not think that. I stopped thinking that a long time ago." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for lies, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because some of the rigid tension left her shoulders. "You are strange," she said. "I have been called worse." The soup was hot enough now, and Everett ladled a generous portion into a wooden bowl. He set it in front of Vasha along with a spoon and then filled a smaller bowl for himself. She did not wait for permission, just grabbed the spoon and began eating with single-minded focus. Everett ate his own soup slowly, watching her from the corner of his eye, seeing how her hands shook, and how she had to force herself not to gulp it down too fast. When both bowls were empty, Vasha set down her spoon and looked at him with an expression of wary confusion. "Why are you helping me?" Everett considered the question. Why was he helping her? Because she was starving and he had food. Because he remembered being desperate and alone. Because 10 years ago, an enemy soldier had spared his life when he had been wounded and lost behind enemy lines, and that single act of mercy had changed everything he thought he knew about the world. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. Vasha shook her head slowly. "Humans do not help orcs. Humans kill orcs. That is how the world works," Maybe, Everett said, but maybe it does not have to be that way. She laughed again, that same bitter sound. You are naive. Probably. He stood and collected the bowls, taking them to the wash bucket. You can stay here tonight if you need to. The barn has clean hay and it is dry. I will not bother you. Vasha stood as well, swaying slightly, and caught herself on the edge of the table. Why would you let me stay? Because there are wolves in the forest, and you are in no condition to fight them off. Everett dried the bowls and set them on the shelf. And because the nights are getting cold, you need rest and safety to recover your strength. She stared at him for a long time, and he could see the internal battle playing out behind her eyes. Trust warred with suspicion, desperation with caution. Finally, she gave a single sharp nod. One night, she said. Then I leave. Fair enough. Everett opened the door and pointed toward the barn, a sturdy structure about 30 yards from the cottage. Take whatever you need. There are blankets in the chest by the door. Vasha walked past him, her movements stiff and careful, and headed toward the barn without looking back. Everett watched her go, then closed the door and returned to his evening chores. The chickens needed to be fed and shut in for the night. The goats checked on. The fence line he had been repairing would need more work tomorrow. Life on the frontier did not pause for unexpected guests. As the sun set in a blaze of orange and red, painting the sky like fire, Everett finished his tasks and returned to the cottage. He barred the door from the inside, more out of habit than fear, and banked the fire for the night. Before he lay down on his pallet, he stood at the window and looked out toward the barn. A faint glow showed through the cracks in the walls where Vasha must have lit the lantern he kept there. She was alive and safe for tonight, at least. That had to be enough. Sleep came slowly, as it often did, and when it came, it brought dreams of fire and screaming, of burning camps and desperate faces. Everett woke several times in the night, each time listening to the sounds of the darkness, making sure the world beyond his walls remained quiet. By the time gray dawn light began to seep through the window, he had given up on rest and rose to start the day. He built up the fire, started a pot of porridge with the last of his oats, and stepped outside to begin the morning chores. The air was cool and damp, heavy with the promise of more rain, and mist clung to the ground in pale sheets. Everett fed the chickens, collected eggs, milked the 2 goats, and hauled fresh water from the well. All the while, he did not look toward the barn, did not check to see if Vasha was still there. She had said one night. If she was gone, that was her choice. But when Everett returned to the cottage with his bucket of goat's milk, he found Vasha sitting on the front step, her arms wrapped around her knees, watching him with those unsettling yellow eyes. She looked slightly better in the morning light, less like a corpse, though still desperately thin and haggard. "Good morning," Everett said, as though finding an orc girl on his doorstep was an everyday occurrence. "Morning," Vasha replied. She stood slowly, testing her balance. "I should go." "You could," Everett agreed. "Or you could stay for breakfast. I have porridge cooking and fresh goat's milk. You could use a few more meals before you go anywhere." Vasha's jaw worked, her small tusks visible as she pressed her lips together. "Why do you keep feeding me?" "Because you are hungry." Everett brushed past her into the cottage, setting the milk bucket on the table. "And because I have food, it is not complicated." "It is complicated," Vasha said, following him inside. "You are human, I am orc. This is not how things are supposed to work." Everett stirred the porridge and then ladled it into 2 bowls. He poured milk over both and handed one to Vasha. "Then I suppose we are both doing it wrong." She took the bowl, staring down at it as though it might bite her. "I cannot pay you back. Did I ask you to?" "No, but then eat your breakfast and stop arguing." Everett sat down at the table and began eating his own porridge. It was plain and filling, nothing special, but it was warm and it would give them both energy for the day's work. Vasha sat down slowly and started eating, her movements more controlled than the night before, though no less hungry. Between bites, she said, "I should at least work for my food. I am not a beggar." "All right." Everett considered this. "Can you mend fences?" "Yes." "Then you can help me finish the fence line by the barley field. The storms brought down a section, and it needs to be fixed before the deer get in and eat my crop." Vasha nodded, something that might have been relief crossing her face. "I can do that." They finished breakfast in silence, and then Everett gathered the tools they would need: hammers, nails, spare boards, wire. He handed Vasha a pair of worn work gloves that were too large for her hands but better than nothing, and together they walked out to the damaged section of fence. The work was hard and repetitive, requiring strength and patience. Everett showed Vasha what needed to be done, and she followed his lead with a competence that suggested she had done this kind of work before. They worked side by side in the morning mist, the only sounds the ringing of hammers against nails and the occasional call of birds from the forest edge. As the sun climbed higher and the mist burned away, Everett found himself stealing glances at his unexpected helper. Vasha moved with an economy of motion that spoke of experience, her hands steady despite her weakened state. Her green skin glistened with sweat as the day warmed, and he could see the muscles in her arms and shoulders, lean and ropey from hunger but still strong. "You are good at this," Everett said after a while. Vasha shrugged, driving a nail home with 3 precise strikes. "My clan moved often. We built and rebuilt our camps many times. Everyone learned how to work with wood and stone. That must have been difficult, never having a permanent home." "It was life." Vasha moved to the next broken board. "We went where the hunting was good, where the humans would not find us. It worked well enough until it did not." Everett wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the pain he heard beneath her matter-of-fact words, but he had learned long ago that some wounds could not be healed with words. So instead he just kept working, kept her company in the silence, and let his presence say what his voice could not. By midday the fence was repaired, strong and straight, and Everett's stomach was growling with hunger. He wiped sweat from his forehead and surveyed their work with satisfaction. "Good job," he said. "That would have taken me twice as long alone." Vasha pulled off the 2 large gloves and handed them back to him. "What else needs doing? Right now, lunch." Everett started walking back toward the cottage. "There are eggs and I can make flatbread if we are lucky." "You do not have to keep feeding me," Vasha said, though she followed him anyway. "I know." Everett did not elaborate, and Vasha did not press the issue. Lunch was simple, but good eggs scrambled with wild garlic and flatbread cooked on a stone over the fire. They ate sitting outside on rough wooden benches Everett had made years ago, the sun warm on their faces, the breeze carrying the scent of growing things. "This land is good," Vasha said, looking out over the barley field and the vegetable garden and the small orchard of young fruit trees Everett had been nursing along for 3 years. "You work it well." "It is all I have," Everett said. "After the militia, I needed something to build, something that was not about destruction. This farm is that something." Vasha looked at him with new understanding. "You were a soldier for 8 years. Border militia, northern frontier." "I saw a lot of things I wish I had not seen, did a lot of things I wish I had not done." Everett stared down at his hands, at the calluses and scars that marked them. "When my term ended, I took my pay and came out here, far from people, far from conflict, just me and the land and the work." "Do you regret it, being alone?" "Sometimes," Everett admitted. "But it is better than the alternative. Out here, the only life I am responsible for is my own. Vasha was quiet for a moment, then said, "And mine, apparently." Everett met her eyes and saw the faintest hint of humor there, and something in his chest loosened. Apparently. The afternoon passed in more work. Everett showed Vasha the vegetable garden, where weeds had grown rampant during the rains, and they spent hours on their knees pulling up the invaders and checking the growing plants for disease and pests. Vasha worked with the same quiet competence she had shown at the fence, her hands gentle with the delicate seedlings, her movements efficient. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Everett straightened up and pressed his hands to his aching lower back. "That is enough for today," he said. "Any more and I will not be able to walk tomorrow." Vasha stood as well, brushing dirt from her knees. Her clothes were filthy and torn, Everett realized, barely more than rags. She had been wearing them when she fled the attack on her clan, had been living in them for however many weeks she had been running and hiding and starving. "Wait here," Everett said, and went into the cottage. He rummaged through the chest at the foot of his bed, pulling out items he had not touched in years. At the bottom, he found what he was looking for: a shirt and trousers that had belonged to his younger sister, left behind when she had visited 5 years ago. They would be too small for him but might fit Vasha. He brought them outside and held them out to her. "These are clean. You can wear them if you want. There is a creek about 100 yards east of here, beyond that stand of birch trees. The water is clear and there is a deep pool where you can wash." Vasha took the clothes slowly, her expression unreadable. "These belong to a woman. My sister. She left them here and never came back for them." Everett did not mention that his sister had never come back at all, that she had married a merchant from a town 3 weeks' journey south, and now had children of her own. That she wrote him letters sometimes, letters full of happiness and love and life, letters that made him both glad for her and achingly lonely. "I will wash," Vasha said quietly. "Thank you." She walked away toward the birch trees, the clothes clutched in her hands, and Everett returned to the cottage to prepare dinner. He had rabbit from a trap he had checked that morning, and he roasted it with wild herbs and root vegetables, making the cottage fill with the rich scent of cooking meat. When Vasha returned, the sun had fully set, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. She looked transformed, still thin, still marked by hardship, but clean and wearing clothes that fit reasonably well. Her hair, which had been a matted mess, was wet and slicked back from her face, revealing the strong lines of her features, the distinctive points of her ears, the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw. She was, Everett realized with some surprise, actually quite striking. "Dinner is ready," he said, turning away before she could see him staring. They ate at the table, the single lantern casting warm light over the simple meal. The rabbit was good, the meat tender and flavorful, and there was enough for both of them to eat until they were full. It was the best meal either of them had eaten in some time, and they savored it in companionable silence. After dinner, Vasha helped Everett clean up, and then they stood awkwardly in the cottage, neither quite sure what to say. Finally, Vasha said, "I should go to the barn." "You could stay here," Everett said before he could stop himself. "I mean, the barn is fine, but the cottage is warmer and there is more room. I can sleep in the barn if it makes you more comfortable." Vasha looked around the small cottage, her yellow eyes taking in the single pallet, the single table, the single life this place represented. "You would give up your bed for me. You have been through enough. You deserve a real bed and walls between you and the night." For the first time since he had found her collapsed against his fence, Vasha smiled, a small, tentative thing, but real. "You are very strange, Everett Jamison. So you have said." Everett gathered a blanket from his pallet. "The barn it is, then. Wait. Vasha reached out and caught his arm, her fingers warm against his skin. We can both stay here. I do not need you to give up your bed. I can sleep on the floor by the fire. Everett looked down at her hand on his arm, at the surprising gentleness of her touch, and something shifted in the air between them, something he could not quite name. All right, he said. If you are sure, I am sure. So Everett laid out blankets by the hearth while Vasha settled herself on them, and then he returned to his own pallet on the other side of the room. He turned down the lantern until only embers glowed in the hearth, casting faint orange light across the walls. Everett. Vasha's voice came soft through the darkness. Yes, thank you. For the bread, for everything. You are welcome, Vasha. Sleep came easier that night with another person's breathing filling the silence, and Everett's dreams were quiet and still. Morning brought a routine they fell into as though they had been practicing it for years. Everett woke first, stirred the fire, and started breakfast. Vasha woke shortly after, folded her blankets neatly, and went outside to help with the morning chores. They ate together, worked together, shared the simple tasks of maintaining the farm. Days passed like this, one blending into the next. Vasha stayed, though neither of them discussed it explicitly. She simply remained, and Everett did not ask her to leave. The one night became 2, then a week, then 2 weeks. The work was easier with 2 people, and the lonely silence Everett had grown accustomed to was filled now with conversation and shared laughter. Vasha was funny, he discovered. She had a dry wit and a sharp tongue, and she was not afraid to tease him when he did something clumsy or foolish. In turn, Everett found himself opening up in ways he had not done in years, telling her stories about his life, his family, his years in the militia. They talked while they worked, while they ate, while they sat outside in the evenings watching the stars emerge. Vasha grew stronger as the days passed. Her face filled out, her skin took on a healthier sheen, and the hollow look left her eyes. She smiled more, laughed more, and slowly the wary desperation that had marked her when they first met faded into something softer. Everett noticed other things too. The way she hummed while she worked, wordless melodies in a minor key that sounded like wind through trees. The way she was gentle with the animals, murmuring to the goats in her own language, stroking the chickens with careful hands. The way she watched him sometimes when she thought he was not looking, her expression thoughtful and wondering. He caught himself watching her too, more often than he should. Caught himself noticing the strength in her arms as she hauled water, the grace in her movements as she worked in the garden, the way the sun caught in her wet hair when she washed at the creek. He tried to ignore the feeling stirring in his chest, tried to tell himself it was just gratitude or companionship or loneliness. But he was lying to himself, and he knew it. 3 weeks after he had found Vasha collapsed by his fence, a trader came through. Everett was in the barn repairing a harness when he heard the jingle of harness bells and the creak of wagon wheels. He set down his tools and walked out to find a covered wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses making its way up the rough track to his farm. The trader was a man named Marcus Hollies, someone Everett had traded with before, a reliable man who made the circuit through the frontier settlements every month or so. Marcus pulled his wagon to a stop and climbed down, his weather-beaten face breaking into a smile. "Everett, good to see you," Marcus said, gripping Everett's hand in a firm shake. "I have those nails you asked for last time and some salt if you need it." "Good, I can use both." Everett glanced back toward the cottage and saw Vasha standing in the doorway, half hidden in shadow. "Come inside, we can settle up." Marcus followed his gaze and his expression changed, the smile fading into something harder. "You have company." "A friend," Everett said carefully. "She has been helping me with the farm." Marcus's voice went flat. That is an orc, Everett. Her name is Vasha. Marcus took a step back, his hand moving unconsciously toward the knife at his belt. Are you mad? Orcs are dangerous. She could kill you in your sleep. She has had plenty of opportunity and has not done so yet. Everett kept his voice calm and steady, though anger was beginning to simmer in his gut. She is no danger to anyone. You do not know that. Orcs are savages, Everett. They raid and kill and burn. You were in the militia, you know what they are capable of. I know what some of them have done, Everett said. I also know what humans have done to them. Vasha's clan was attacked without provocation, her family killed. She has been starving and alone. If that makes her a savage, then what are we? Marcus stared at him as though he were speaking a foreign language. This is insane. People are going to hear about this, Everett. They are not going to understand. I do not care what people think. You should. Marcus climbed back onto his wagon, his movements sharp and angry. You are making a mistake. That thing is going to betray you, and when it does, do not come crying to me. He snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, turning in a wide circle and heading back down the track. Everett watched him go, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. When he turned back toward the cottage, he saw that Vasha had emerged fully into the daylight, her face pale and strained. He is right, she said. I should leave. I am causing you problems. No. Everett walked to her, stopping just in front of her. He is ignorant and afraid. That is not your fault. But he will tell others. People will know an orc is living on your farm. They will think badly of you, or worse. Vasha's voice was thick with emotion. I do not want to bring trouble to you, Everett. You have been kind to me, kinder than anyone in my whole life. I will not repay that kindness by ruining your reputation. I do not care about my reputation. Everett reached out and took her hand, holding it firmly. I care about you. You are not causing problems, Vasha. You are my friend, and friends do not abandon each other because some traitor has narrow-minded opinions. Tears welled in Vasha's yellow eyes, spilling over and running down her green cheeks. Why? Why do you care about me? I am nothing. I am just a homeless orc, a refugee, a burden. You are not nothing. Everett squeezed her hand gently. You are brave and strong and kind. You work harder than anyone I have ever met. You make me laugh. You make this place feel less lonely. That is not nothing, Vasha. That is everything. She stared at him, her lips trembling, and then she pulled her hand free and turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. I do not understand you. I am not that complicated. Yes, you are. Vasha's voice was muffled. You are the most complicated, confusing, frustrating human I have ever met. Nothing you do makes sense. You give me your food, your clothes, your home. You defend me to your own people. You treat me like I matter. Why? Everett thought about the question, really thought about it, and realized he did not have a simple answer. Or maybe he did, but it was not one he was ready to say out loud. Not yet. Because it is the right thing to do, he said finally. And because I want to. Is that not reason enough? Vasha turned back to face him, her expression raw and vulnerable. What if I want to stay? Not just for a few more days, but really stay. What if I do not want to leave? Everett's heart did something strange in his chest, a painful clench followed by a flood of warmth. Then stay, he said. Stay as long as you want. People will talk. Let them talk. They will make your life difficult. My life has always been difficult. I will manage. Vasha laughed, but it was a broken sound. You are impossible, so I have been told. She closed the distance between them and, to Everett's complete surprise, wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. He stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the sudden contact, and then slowly, carefully, he returned the embrace, his arms coming up to hold her. She was warm and solid against him, her head tucked beneath his chin, and she smelled like sun-warmed earth, and the soap she had been using to wash her clothes. Everett felt something crack open inside him, some wall he had built around his heart, and emotions he had been trying to ignore came flooding through. He cared about her, more than cared. He was falling for her, this strange, fierce, wonderful orc girl who had stumbled into his life and turned everything upside down. But saying it out loud felt impossible, so he just held her and hoped she understood. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms while the sun moved across the sky and the world continued on around them. Eventually they pulled apart, both of them a little awkward, a little uncertain, but something had shifted between them. Something had been acknowledged, even if it had not been spoken. Life on the farm continued, but now there was a new awareness between them, a tension that was not unpleasant but was definitely present. Everett found himself hyper-conscious of Vasha's presence, of where she was and what she was doing. He noticed small things he had not noticed before: the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, the way she tilted her head when she was listening, the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. And he caught her watching him too, her gaze lingering on him when she thought he was not paying attention. Neither of them spoke about it. They just worked and talked and lived, day by day, and let the unspoken thing between them grow. A month after Vasha had arrived, Everett woke in the middle of the night to the sound of screaming. He jolted upright, his heart hammering, and saw Vasha thrashing in her blankets by the fire, her face contorted in terror, her voice raw and desperate. "No, please, no, mother, run!" Everett was across the room in an instant, kneeling beside her, his hands on her shoulders. "Vasha, wake up! It is a dream! You are safe!" She fought him, still trapped in the nightmare, her eyes wide and unseeing. Everett held her gently but firmly, speaking in a low, steady voice. "Vasha, you are safe. You are with me at the farm. No one is hurting you. Wake up." Her eyes focused suddenly, snapping to his face, and she sucked in a gasping breath. "Everett, I am here. You were dreaming." Vasha's whole body was shaking, sweat beading on her skin. She grabbed onto his arms, her fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "The fire," she whispered. "I could see the fire and hear the screaming. My mother was burning. I could not reach her. I tried, but I could not. SHH." Everett pulled her into his arms, holding her as she broke down, her body racked with sobs. "It was a dream, just a dream." "It was real," Vasha choked out. "It happened. I watched her die and I could not save her. I know." Everett stroked her hair, his heart breaking for her. "I know it was real. I am so sorry, Vasha." She clung to him and cried deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to tear out of her very soul, and Everett just held her and let her grieve. He knew there were no words that could fix this kind of pain, no comfort that could erase what she had lived through. All he could do was be there, solid and steady, and let her know she was not alone. Eventually the sobs subsided into quiet weeping, and then into hiccuping breaths, and finally into exhausted silence. Vasha sagged against him, drained and hollow, and Everett continued to hold her, rocking her slightly, murmuring wordless comfort. "I am sorry," Vasha whispered. "I did not mean to wake you. Do not apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for. I keep seeing them, every time I close my eyes." "The fire, the blood, her voice broke again. "I know." Everett pressed his lips to the top of her head, a gesture of comfort and affection he did not think about until it was already done. "I have nightmares too, from the war. They get better with time, but they never really go away." Vasha pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes red and swollen. "How do you live with it, one day at a time? I focus on the present, on what I can control. The farm helps. Having a purpose helps." And he hesitated, then continued, "Having someone to share the burden helps too." "You have been alone for a long time." "Yes, until you arrived. Something flickered in Vasha's eyes, something warm and wondering and a little afraid. "Everett, you should try to sleep," Everett said gently, cutting off whatever she had been about to say because he was not sure either of them was ready for it. "Tomorrow will be a long day. We need to harvest the barley soon." Vasha nodded, but when Everett started to pull away, she held on to him. "Stay," she said. "Please. I do not want to be alone right now." So Everett stayed, settling beside her on the blankets by the fire, and Vasha curled against him, her head on his shoulder, her hand resting over his heart. He wrapped an arm around her and closed his eyes, and somehow, impossibly, they both slept. Morning came too soon and too bright, sunlight streaming through the window and illuminating the cottage with golden light. Everett woke to find Vasha still curled against him, her breathing deep and even, her face peaceful in sleep. He watched her for a moment, committing the sight to memory, and then carefully extracted himself and rose to start the day. When Vasha woke, neither of them mentioned what had happened during the night. They just went about their morning routine, a little quieter than usual, a little more careful with each other. But that night, when they prepared for sleep, Vasha did not settle by the fire. She looked at Everett's pallet, then at him, and said, "May I sleep beside you? I do not want to be alone if the nightmares come again." Everett's mouth went dry, but he nodded. "Of course." So she lay down on the pallet beside him, close but not touching, and they lay in the darkness listening to each other breathe. Eventually sleep claimed them both, and when Everett woke in the morning, Vasha was curled against his side, her arm draped across his chest, her face tucked into the curve of his neck. He did not move, did not want to disturb her, and lay there feeling her warmth and the steady rhythm of her breathing and wondering how something so simple could feel so monumental. From that night on, they shared the pallet. It was not romantic, not really, just two people seeking comfort and companionship in the darkness. But it was intimate in a way that went beyond physical touch, and Everett found himself growing more attached to Vasha with each passing day. The barley harvest came, and they worked from dawn to dusk, cutting the grain and binding it into sheaves. The work was back-breaking and exhausting, but they worked as a team, moving in sync, anticipating each other's needs. When the last of the barley was safely stored in the barn, they celebrated with a simple meal and a rare cup of ale Everett had been saving. "To the harvest," Everett said, raising his cup. "To the harvest," Vasha echoed, clinking her cup against his. "And to partnerships." Their eyes met over the rims of their cups, and something electric passed between them. Everett felt his heart rate pick up, felt heat rise in his cheeks, and quickly looked away before he did something foolish. But later, lying in the dark with Vasha warm beside him, he could not stop thinking about that moment, about the look in her eyes, about the words she had used. Partnership. Was that what they had? Or was it something more? Autumn deepened, the leaves turning brilliant shades of red and gold, the air growing crisp and cool. Everett and Vasha prepared for winter, preserving vegetables, smoking meat, gathering firewood, and reinforcing the barn and cottage against the cold that was coming. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Vasha said, "I never thought I would have this." "Have what?" Everett asked. "A home. Safety. Someone who," she paused, struggling with the words, "someone who cares whether I live or die." Everett reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I care, Vasha, very much." She looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. "I care too, more than I should, probably, more than is wise." "Why is it not wise?" "Because you are human and I am orc. Because the world does not approve of people like us being together. Because I could bring you nothing but trouble." "You have brought me nothing but joy," Everett said firmly. "And I do not care what the world thinks. I stopped caring about that a long time ago." Vasha's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You are going to make me cry again." "Sorry. No, you are not." "No, I am not." Everett smiled and squeezed her hand. "You are stuck with me now, Vasha Zorath." "I suppose there are worse fates," she said, but she was smiling too. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. It was peaceful and perfect, and Everett felt a contentment he had not known in years. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. 2 days later, Everett was in the barn when he heard the sound of horses approaching. He stepped outside and saw a group of riders coming up the track, 6 men armed with bows and blades. His stomach sank. He recognized the leader, a man named Thomas Kelly, a farmer from a settlement about 2 days' ride south. Thomas had a reputation for being hard and uncompromising, and he hated orcs with a passion. Everett walked out to meet them, keeping his body language calm and non-threatening. "Thomas, what brings you out this way?" Thomas reined in his horse and looked down at Everett with cold eyes. "We heard you have been harboring an orc, Everett. That true?" "I have a guess, if that is what you mean." "Do not play word games with me. Marcus Hollis told us you have an orc living here." "A female. Where is she?" Everett's jaw tightened. "She is none of your concern." "Wrong." Thomas swung down from his horse, and the other riders did the same, forming a loose semicircle around Everett. "Orcs are everyone's concern. They are a threat to every human settlement on the frontier. We cannot allow them to live among us. Vasha is not a threat to anyone. She is a refugee, alone and unarmed. She has done nothing to you or anyone else." "She is an orc," Thomas said, as though that explained everything. "That is enough. Now where is she?" "I told you, she is none of your concern. This is my land, Thomas. You have no authority here. We have the authority to defend ourselves and our families." Thomas gestured to his men. "Search the place. Find the orc." Everett stepped forward, blocking the path to the cottage. "You will do no such thing. This is my property and you are not welcome here. Leave, now." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "You are choosing an orc over your own people. Have you lost your mind?" "I am choosing decency over hatred. If that makes me mad, so be it." One of the other men, a young hothead named Peter Jensen, spat on the ground. "You are a traitor, Jamison. Orc lover. You should be run out of the territory." "Watch your mouth, Peter," Everett said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Or what? You will protect your orc whore." "That is what she is it not? You are keeping her as your..." Everett's fist connected with Peter's jaw before the man could finish his sentence. Peter went down hard, blood spurting from his split lip, and chaos erupted. The other men rushed forward, and Everett found himself fighting for his life. He was outnumbered and outmatched, but his militia training kicked in and he fought with ruthless efficiency. He dropped one man with an elbow to the temple, blocked a wild swing from another, and kicked a third in the knee hard enough to send him stumbling. But there were too many, and they quickly overwhelmed him, dragging him to the ground, fists and boots raining down on him. Through the pain and confusion, Everett heard a roar, primal and furious, and suddenly the weight was lifted off him. He rolled onto his side, gasping for breath, and saw Vasha wading into the fight like an avenging spirit. She was unarmed, but she did not need weapons. Her fists were hammers, her feet were clubs, and she fought with a ferocity that sent the men scattering. She grabbed Peter by the back of his shirt and hurled him into Thomas, sending both men sprawling. She blocked a punch from another man and responded with a devastating uppercut that lifted him off his feet. "Get away from him," she snarled, her voice raw with rage. "Touch him again and I will kill you all." Thomas scrambled backward, his face pale. "She is insane. She is protecting me," Everett said, staggering to his feet. His ribs screamed in protest and he tasted blood, but he forced himself upright. Just like I would protect her. Now get off my land before I let her finish what you started. The men did not need to be told twice. They retreated to their horses, dragging their wounded with them, and mounted up. Thomas pointed a shaking finger at Everett. This is not over. The council will hear about this. Let them hear, Everett said. I have done nothing wrong. The riders galloped away, leaving Everett and Vasha standing in the yard, both breathing hard, both bruised and bloody. When they were gone, Vasha turned to Everett, her hands trembling. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I will live." Everett touched his side and winced. "Probably some cracked ribs. I am fine. Everett, I am so sorry. This is my fault. If I had not been here, stop." Everett reached out and cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "This is not your fault. They are the ones who chose violence. They are the ones who are wrong. But they hurt you because of me. And I would take 1,000 beatings before I let them hurt you." Everett leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes. "You matter to me, Vasha. You matter more than anything." He felt her hands come up to grip his wrists, felt her breath hitch. "Everett, I love you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know I should not. I know it is complicated and difficult and probably impossible, but I love you. I have loved you for weeks now, maybe from the moment I saw you collapsed by that fence. I love your strength and your kindness and your laugh. I love the way you hum while you work and the way you are gentle with the animals. I love everything about you, and I do not care if the whole world thinks I am insane." Vasha made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You are insane. You are the most wonderfully, impossibly insane human I have ever met." She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her own eyes shining with tears. "And I love you too. I have loved you since you gave me that bread, since you offered me kindness when you had no reason to. I love you with everything I am, Everett Jamison." Everett kissed her then, unable to hold back any longer. Her lips were soft and warm beneath his, and she kissed him back with desperate intensity, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss was clumsy and inexperienced and perfect, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were crying. "What are we going to do?" Vasha whispered. "They will come back. They will try to take me away or hurt you, or then we will leave," Everett said. "We will go somewhere else, somewhere they cannot find us. I will sell the farm or abandon it, I do not care. Nothing matters except being with you. But this is your home. You built this place with your own hands. You are my home now." Everett kissed her again, soft and lingering. "Wherever you are, that is where I belong." They stood in the yard, holding each other as the sun set and darkness crept across the land. Inside, Everett's ribs ached and his face throbbed, but none of it mattered. Vasha was safe, she loved him, and they were together. Everything else was just details. That night they lay in bed, wrapped in each other's arms, and made plans. They would leave before winter set in, head west into the unsettled territories where few humans ventured. They would find a new place, start over, build a life where no one knew them or cared about the differences between human and orc. It would not be easy, but they would face it together. 3 days later, as they were packing what supplies they could carry, another visitor arrived. This time it was a single rider, an older man Everett recognized as Henrik Morrison, the elected leader of the regional council. Henrik was a fair man, known for his level-headedness, and Everett felt a small flicker of hope as he approached. Henrik dismounted slowly, his weathered face serious. "Everett, may I speak with you?" "Of course." Everett gestured to the benches outside the cottage, and they sat. Vasha stood in the doorway, watching warily. Henrik looked at her, then back at Everett. "Thomas Kelly came to me with a complaint." He says you are harboring an orc, that you attacked his men when they tried to investigate. That is not what happened, Everett said evenly. They came here with violence in mind. They attacked me and Vasha defended me. We were within our rights. Henrik nodded slowly. I believe you. Thomas has a tendency to exaggerate and escalate situations. However, the fact remains that you are housing an orc. That makes people nervous, Everett. There is a lot of fear right now, a lot of old wounds and bad memories. Vasha is not responsible for any of that, I know. But fear does not care about individual circumstances. Henrik sighed and rubbed his face. I am not here to threaten you or demand you send her away. I am here to warn you. People are talking and the talk is getting ugly. Some are calling for you to be banished from the territory. Others want to take more direct action. Everett's jaw tightened. Let them try. I am trying to prevent that. Henrik looked at him with genuine concern. You were a good soldier, Everett. You served with honor. I do not want to see you hurt or killed over this. Is there no way to resolve this peacefully? We are leaving, Everett said. Before winter, we will go west, find new land. You will never have to worry about us again. Henrik looked relieved and sad at the same time. That is probably wise. I am sorry it has come to this. So am I. The older man stood and offered his hand. Everett shook it and Henrik said, I wish you both well, truly. What you have, he glanced at Vasha. It is rare. Hold on to it. I intend to. Henrik mounted his horse and rode away, and Everett returned to Vasha. She looked shaken but determined. When do we leave? Tomorrow, Everett said. We have enough supplies. No point in waiting. That night they made love for the first time, a tender and awkward and deeply emotional joining that left them both breathless and awed. Afterward they lay tangled together, Vasha's head on Everett's chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. I am afraid, Vasha admitted quietly. Of what? Of the future, of the unknown, of losing you. You will not lose me. Everett tightened his arms around her. I am not going anywhere. Promise. I promise. They slept fitfully that night, both aware that they were saying goodbye to everything familiar, both excited and terrified about what lay ahead. Morning came cold and clear, the first real bite of autumn in the air. Everett and Vasha loaded their supplies onto the small cart Everett had built years ago, hitched it to one of the goats trained for pulling, and took one last look at the farm. The cottage stood solid and silent, the fields bare after the harvest, the barn full of hay and grain that Everett had arranged to have collected by a neighbor who had always been kind to him. It hurt to leave, but not as much as Everett had expected. This place had been his refuge, but Vasha was his future. They set off west, following old game trails and half-remembered paths, heading away from civilization and toward the wilderness. The first days were hard, the travel slow and exhausting, but they pressed on. At night they made camp, built small fires and slept under the stars, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms. As they traveled, they talked about everything and nothing. Vasha told Everett about her childhood, about her clan's traditions and beliefs, about the mother she missed with an ache that would never fully heal. Everett told her about his own family, about his time in the militia, about the man he had been and the man he wanted to become. They laughed together, argued over small things, made decisions as partners. It was exhausting and exhilarating and felt more right than anything Everett had ever done. 3 weeks into their journey, they founded a small valley nestled between two wooded hills, with a clear stream running through it and good flat land for farming. The valley was isolated, far from any settlement, and rich with game and wild plants. It was perfect. This could work, Vasha said, looking around with wonder. We could build here. We could, Everett agreed. It would take time, but we could make a life here, together. Together. They set up a temporary camp and began the work of building their new home. It was harder than before, with no established infrastructure, no tools beyond what they had carried, no safety net. But they worked side by side, felling trees, clearing land, laying the foundation for a cabin. Winter came early and hard, and they spent weeks huddled in their half-finished cabin, keeping the fire burning, rationing their supplies, hunting when the weather allowed. There were days when Everett wondered if they would survive, if they had made a terrible mistake. But then Vasha would smile at him across the fire, or reach for his hand in the darkness, or kiss him with a fierceness that stole his breath. And he knew they had made the only choice they could have made. Spring arrived like a benediction, the snow melting, the stream swelling, green shoots pushing up through the brown earth. Everett and Vasha emerged from their cabin thinner and harder, but alive and still together. They finished the cabin, planted a garden, built a small barn for the animals they planned to acquire. Life was not easy, but it was good. They had each other, they had freedom, and they had hope. One evening, as they sat outside their cabin watching the sunset, Everett reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carving he had been working on for weeks. It was a simple thing, a ring made from a piece of oak, polished smooth and carved with intricate patterns. "Vasha," he said, his heart hammering. "I know we cannot have a ceremony like humans do, and I know there is no one to witness or approve, but I want you to know that I am yours completely and forever. Will you accept this? Will you be my wife in all the ways that matter?" Vasha stared at the ring, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Everett slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him, kissing him with a passion that made his head spin. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing and crying, overwhelmed with joy. "I love you," Vasha said. "I will love you until the stars go out." "And I will love you until the end of time," Everett replied. They sat together as the sun set, their fingers intertwined, the ring solid and real on Vasha's hand. They had given up everything to be together: home, safety, acceptance. But they had gained something infinitely more valuable. They had gained each other. Summer came, and with it a new routine. They tended their garden, hunted and foraged, repaired and improved their homestead. They were alone, yes, but they were not lonely. They had built a life together, a life full of work and laughter and love. One warm afternoon, Vasha came to Everett while he was chopping wood and said, "I think I might be pregnant." Everett dropped the axe, his eyes going wide. "You think?" "I am not certain yet, but the signs are there." She smiled, a radiant expression that made her even more beautiful. "We are going to have a child, Everett." Joy and terror flooded through Everett in equal measure. A child, their child, a new life born of their love, a future they could shape and protect. That is wonderful." "That is," he could not find words, so he just grabbed her and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. "We are going to be parents. We are. I do not know how to be a father. And I do not know how to be a mother. We will figure it out together." Vasha kissed him softly. "We have done everything else together. We can do this too." And they did. As summer turned to autumn and autumn to winter, Vasha's belly grew round with their child. Everett fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough, that she did not work too hard, that she was warm and comfortable. Vasha tolerated his hovering with good humor, though she often reminded him that orc women were strong and had been having babies for generations without human men panicking over them. On a cold night in the depths of winter, with snow falling soft and silent outside their cabin, Vasha went into labor. Everett had prepared as best he could, gathering clean cloths and water, stoking the fire high, but nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of it. Vasha labored for hours, her face drawn with pain, her body straining. Everett held her hand and murmured encouragement and felt utterly helpless. But Vasha was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known, and when the first light of dawn crept through the windows, their daughter was born. She was tiny and perfect, with green skin like her mother and dark hair like her father, and when she opened her eyes they were a warm brown that seemed to combine both parents. Everett stared at her in wonder, this impossible miracle, this living proof of their love. "She is beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She is ours," Vasha said, cradling the baby against her chest. "Our daughter." They named her Alina after Everett's grandmother, and Vasha gave her the second name Zara after her own mother. Alina Zara Jamison Zorath. A name that honored both her heritages, that claimed both human and orc as part of her identity. The months that followed were exhausting and joyous. Alina was a healthy baby, loud and demanding and endlessly curious. Everett and Vasha took turns caring for her, walked her around the cabin when she could not sleep, sang to her in the languages of both their peoples. As Alina grew, she became a bridge between two worlds, proof that love could transcend the boundaries others tried to impose. She had her mother's strength and her father's gentle nature, and she was loved beyond measure. Years passed. The cabin became a true home, expanded and improved, surrounded by productive fields and thriving livestock. Alina grew into a bright, cheerful child, chasing chickens and helping in the garden and asking endless questions about everything. Sometimes traders or travelers would pass through their remote valley, and at first they would react with shock and suspicion at the sight of a human man, an orc woman, and their half-breed child living together. But Everett and Vasha faced such reactions with calm dignity, and their obvious love and the peace of their home usually softened even the hardest hearts. Word spread slowly of the family in the valley. Some came out of curiosity, some out of judgment, but others came seeking refuge. A young orc man fleeing persecution, a human woman cast out for defending orcs, a mixed family like their own, desperate for acceptance. Everett and Vasha welcomed them all, and slowly, over years, their isolated homestead grew into a small community. It was a place where humans and orcs lived side by side, where differences were celebrated rather than feared, where love was valued above all else. On the 10th anniversary of the day Everett had found Vasha collapsed by his fence, they stood on the porch of their cabin and looked out over the valley. Alina, now 9 years old, was playing with other children in the meadow, her laughter carrying on the wind. The fields were full of growing crops, smoke rose from the chimneys of a dozen homes, and the sound of conversation and music drifted through the evening air. "Did you ever imagine this?" Vasha asked, leaning against Everett's side. "When you gave me that bread all those years ago?" Everett wrapped his arm around her waist and kissed the top of her head. "No, I just knew you needed help and I had to give it. I had no idea it would lead to all this. Do you regret it? We could have had an easier life if we had stayed apart, if we had followed the rules." Not for a single moment. Everett turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Vasha. You and Alina and this life we have built together. I would give up everything 1,000 times over just to have this." Vasha's eyes shone with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you, Everett Jamison. I will love you for the rest of my life and beyond. And I love you, Vasha Zorath, always and forever." They kissed as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and all around them their community lived and thrived, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and love. It had all started with a crust of bread broken in half and shared with someone in need. Such a small act, such a simple gesture. But from that single moment of compassion had grown something extraordinary, something that defied prejudice and hatred and fear. Everett had given Vasha the larger piece because it was the right thing to do. He had not known then that in giving, he would receive so much more in return. He had not known that saving her life would give his own life meaning and purpose and joy beyond anything he had imagined. But that was the way of love, he supposed. It was not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about the small choices, the daily acts of kindness and sacrifice and care. It was about seeing someone in need and offering help without expectation of reward. It was about building something together, one day at a time, one moment at a time. As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, Everett and Vasha went inside to join their daughter for dinner. The table was full, their home was full, their hearts were full. They had everything they needed, and more than they had ever dared to hope for. And it had all begun with a single act of compassion, a choice to see someone not as an enemy or a monster, but as a person worthy of dignity and help. That choice had changed everything, had created ripples that spread far beyond that first moment, touching lives and changing hearts. In the years to come, their community would continue to grow. Alina would grow up to be a leader, advocating for peace and understanding between humans and orcs. Other settlements would follow their example, slowly, hesitantly building bridges instead of walls. The hatred and fear that had defined the relationship between their peoples would not disappear overnight, but it would begin to fade, worn away by the persistence of love and the courage of those willing to defy convention. But that night, as Everett sat at the table with his wife and daughter, surrounded by the warmth of home and the love of family, he was not thinking about the future or the past. He was simply present, grateful for every moment, every breath, every heartbeat that he got to share with the people he loved. Vasha caught his eye across the table and smiled, and Everett smiled back, and Alina chattered happily about her day, and the fire crackled in the hearth, and outside the wind whispered through the trees. It was an ordinary evening, a simple moment, but it was perfect in its ordinariness. This was happiness. This was home. This was what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it, and it had all started with a crust of bread, broken in half and shared.